listening to JargonFree Radio, brought to you by Little Voice Media, the video and audio specialists.
Hi, it's Steve B again, JargonFree Radio, and this month we've got a fascinating guest in the studio here with us in London. Malcolm Deering, somebody many of you may have heard of, been a good friend of mine for a long, long time. And Malcolm's one of the few people I know for a fact has been involved in UK pensions for at least 4 decades. Malcolm, nice to see you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure I've ever been called fascinating before.
Now, you are in a way, Malcolm, because just to explain to the listeners, some people say that I'm a pensions geek, and I've heard people say that about me. It's not something I find offensive. If you speak to pensions geeks, and I do know quite a few of them, what they'll tell you is that Malcolm is actually a geek's geek. Malcolm makes pensions geeks look normal. Now, Malcolm's here today to talk about something that he's become involved in lately, and something that I'd never heard of, but something that I do find fascinating. It's the Pensions Archive Trust. And if I'm right, Malcolm, what the Pensions Archive Trust that you're working with is involved in is putting together a complete history of UK pensions with evidence to support it.
That's right, yes. You shouldn't apologise for not knowing anything about it, because a year ago I'd never heard of it, but they were looking for some geek to do a bit of research, and being a pension history geek, I offered.
Well, pensions history has always been a favourite subject of mine, as you've known. We've spoken about this on and off over the years, but I know how I got involved in being interested in pensions history. I think it was in listening to you talk, but how did you get involved?
It's a long time ago, I suppose, but back in the early mid-80s, I was working for a firm of pension consultants, and the student actuaries said, "Malcolm, will you give us a talk about pension legislation and the history of pensions?" I didn't know much about the history of pensions, so I did a bit of research, and I was hooked thereafter. One thing that did fascinate me at that time was I remember learning about the Guild of St James, which in 1375 decided to provide for a brother who had fallen into mischief and had naught for his old age.
So the first pension, was that the first pension? Who knows?
Well, we can come back.
You know. Yeah.
But no, that's what the research is all about.
I mean, this is, I suppose, the ancient history of pensions for those of us now in the 21st century.
Yes, I've been going through the computer records of London Metropolitan Archives, and I've found fascinating information about the old medieval merchant companies and charity pensions, and of course a lot about the poor law relief, etc.
I know the poor laws are things I've written about loads, again prompted by you all those years ago.
Well, if you want more information, you should contact the London Metropolitan Archives. But during the research, we've come up with one example, which is from the 16th century. There's a reference to the Christ Hospital collection. It's to a charity pension. The will of David Smith, allow me to read a little bit and note, established almshouses for 6 widows, for almshouse residents, and it dates back 1587.
Now that must be about the time of the poor laws.
Well, that is about it. There is in fact an earlier reference to pension provision by churches in the records of St Paul's, which goes back to the 13th century. But computer records
in the 13th century they were.
And we need to investigate that one.
JargonFree Radio with pension guru Steve B.
So forgive me, I mean, I'm intrigued by all of this. Okay, you delve into parish records, you go to churches, you go to guilds, you go through whatever archives happen to exist.
Yes.
You pull out the pension bits
to
show where the DNA of our pension system came from. What do you do with it when you've got it? I mean, what's the end purpose of all this?
My main job is simply to mark up pensions, poor law, etc. Eventually, the files can be researched. And some of these I've actually seen, and there are some fascinating pieces of information. But our information comes wider. As you know, I've had articles about Pensions Archive Trust in the pension press.
Well, I saw this, which is why we're speaking today. I saw this mentioned in Professional Pensions, and I thought, what the hell is that? I've never heard of it.
Well, because of the article, and I think perhaps this is where we might be going today, a gentleman called Chris Lewin drew attention to an Oxford reference to pension provision, which precedes what we've spoken about before. Chris wrote a book, Pension and Insurance Before 1800, A Social History. But that might sound a bit heavy, but in that...
I bet that's by your bedside table, isn't it?
I haven't got a copy. But Chris gives details of a pension from 1180,
All right.
granted by the Exchequer Court to two clerics who held the church of Black Bolton in Oxfordshire. That is early, but I'm hoping as we go on that we can persuade listeners to come up with something earlier.
Now, I was wondering what you were getting at here. I mean, Chris presumably came to you following reading in Professional Pensions and said, here's one I've got for you. But yeah, we have, I don't know why, but we have thousands of listeners to this. Obviously, a lot of people have got nothing better to do with their time. Some of them might be able to help you. Is that, in local parishes or schemes they've worked for, pension schemes in general? Are you interested in anything to do with pensions that might be historic?
We are relying on other people to help us. There's one heck of a wealth of information out there. We can go through existing archive records, but we need people to help us. And one of the ways that they can help us is to just contact us and say, I know about this, or I've got that, or if you go so-and-so, you'll get records. And we rely on that. We can't do all the work. We're a small charity with volunteers. And I think at this stage, I'd like to emphasise, we are basically working within the London area, but we want to go nationwide. So any listeners for any part of the country, if you've got any information, or you think you've got some time to help, contact Pensions Archive Trust.
Now, I'm guessing, because you've got a pile of notes in front of you there, I'm guessing there's a website which you're going to plug in a moment, so I'll give you a chance to do it off the bat. But I'll tell the listeners now that if you're at all interested in this stuff Malcolm's going on about here, we will put something up on the on our website to give you a contact to the trust. In fact, a charity that I think maybe some of us in the pensions industry ought to seriously consider supporting in whatever way we can, not just with the information. But I mean, I'm guessing you've got a website. You may as well say what it is.
Well, I'm not very good at reciting websites, but...
well, hand it over here, I'll do it. No, go on, let's have a look. All these notes, we never have notes for this show. Here we are, I've got it. It's www.pensionsarchive, as though it's one word, .org. Well, that's easy enough, isn't it? So it's an proper organisational one. But we'll put a note of that on the website anyway. But the only... when we spoke once, in fact, you encouraged me once to write about a book that I'd read that I managed to find in a shop. It was called Pensions and Superannuation, or A History of Pensions and Superannuation. And I, for the moment, I can't remember who wrote it.
Dryden Gilling Smith?
Yeah, no, Dryden Gilling Smith. That's exactly it. I bought that, and it's the most thumb-through book that I've got. And in the days when I was working for Scottish Life, many of the B lines that I wrote then were based on Dryden Gilling Smith's research into pensions. Now, his research, that book, I know you've read it because you told me about it in the first place, but it's a book that really is fascinating because the past doesn't change, does it? Pensions legislation changes all the time. Every day. If you think you're up to date with pensions, well, you might have been this morning, but you might not be now at lunchtime. Whereas with the past is the past, so you can actually treat it as a subject. And his history of state pensions and the things that Cadbury and people did in the run-up to the 1908, 1911 stuff, what Beveridge did in the 40s and 50s. That is in of itself a hard topic to find anything current that you can read if you are interested in the subject.
I agree. I sometimes wonder how people coming into the industry over now or over the last few years actually can see pensions without knowing the context of it. So I think it's as much for the people coming into the industry as it is to what I regard pensions history as part of our social history. And I regard it, being a pension history geek, as an important part of our social history. And indeed, it does give us a possibility to learn from our mistakes. I leave you, Steve, and your listeners to decide to what degree governments have failed to learn from lessons of history.
We're recording this, aren't we, at the back end of May, and just a couple of weeks ago we had the Queen's speech, which really did three big things for pensions. One, I think we're finally grasping the nettle of public sector pensions and how that might be affordable in the longer term. But the two big changes, it seems to me, is that we've now, at last, got a government that's serious about providing a subsistence level pension in the way that Beveridge envisaged, but in truth he never achieved, even with his far-reaching reforms. People think that we used to have a subsistence level pension. It had only been going a few years, as I'm sure you know, before it already started to become a pay maybe one day, that kind of thing. But we might finally get to where Beveridge thought he might have got to in the early 50s now. But the payoff for that is that people have to understand that pensions aren't cheap. A good pension costs as much as a house.
Yes.
Now, if the pension age, the date you reach your entitlement to state pensions, if that stays fixed, and we live longer and longer because of increases in mortality, if that stays fixed in time, then sooner or later, paying pensions longer and longer will cost more and more, and we won't be able to hold it at a subsistence level. So the second thing that's being done in tandem with the decent pension, decent flat rate pension coming in, is that we're going to have these moving goalposts, as they've been called in the press, where as we gradually age, the pensions age grows up with us. So it gets further and further. So the downside of that, of course, is a lot of people saving in the future won't know precisely when their state pension age is going to be. It could change, and but it does ensure, doesn't it, that we can fix something and learn some of the lessons of the past. If we're going to have, if we're going to try and provide subsistence level pensions for people in retirement, we have to define first what retirement is in terms of length of time. So if we live to be 100, there's no point retiring at 65. So maybe those lessons are being learned. I'd argue that the current legislation is quite enlightened.
No, I agree with you. There's one point I'd pick up. I happen to know when my state pension is going to start. It's going to be the end of June.
Oh, this year?
Of this year.
Oh, good for you. Your state pension will start, and so will your liability to pay national insurance contributions, because that's something else that the state pension age is. It's a trigger point that pays. It says when you get your entitlement to pension, but it's also a trigger point saying when you've done your bit for national insurance.
Yes.
I do worry that this talk that we've had lately from government of saying why don't we merge tax and national insurance might fundamentally change things, so that with vast numbers of baby boomers, you're at the leading edge of that, I guess, going into retirement, they might also carry on paying national insurance if they carry on working. What do you think about that?
Well, national insurance is tax, and it would be simpler if one could combine the two. But I defy anybody to come up with a system which is fair to everybody, or possibly more importantly, seems fair to everybody. I suspect we are stuck with it for the foreseeable future.
So it's either two taxes or one tax, and what difference does it make, your view?
People will be complaining that they're paying more than other people and it's not fair, and will probably argue that overall everybody's paying more, and it's like the switch to decimalisation, it's all a con.
JargonFree Radio with pension guru Steve B.
Well, one last thing, while we're talking about the future, even though you're an expert in the past, I think it is right that we should talk about the future, because the future comes out of the past. We're about to, aren't we, this year, just after your 65th birthday, by the sounds of it, we are about to embark on radical reform in the UK, where we're about to have auto-enrolment kick in starting from October this year, with maybe 13 million people, about half the workforce, being swept into pension saving. Fortunately, with the flat rate pension coming as well, so you won't get people losing value from those savings. Your views on mass pension saving?
Well, I start from a question. Will auto-enrolment work? The general attitude of people is they don't want to save. And in the continuing absence of any real information or encouragement and explanation to people as to why they should save, I wish auto-enrolment well, but I have great concerns. One could look back to the past of the introduction of personal pensions and see what a failure that was, insofar as it didn't generate any significant additional savings.
So, but this is generating pension schemes which ought to be more efficient than personal pensions, didn't they?
If people stay in them.
Well, I suppose, Malcolm, that's enough about the future, something that you won't be an expert on until it's happened, because primarily you and your work at the Pensions Archive Trust is putting together all of this information for future generations, but in particular for future researchers to have at their fingertips first-hand evidence of things that might be of interest when they're putting together the history of this stuff and how it developed. And you're right, I think, is part of the social fabric of the country. Pensions are highly important, highly emotive things, as we found out lately with the granny tax and all that sort of thing. With the Pensions Archive Trust, we've decided here at JargonFree that we're going to become a big supporter. But anyone else who wants to support you, I take it you're pretty much open to people saying, look, what kind of help can we give you? We know you want information, but maybe they could just help by getting the name of the trust more widely understood and known in and outside of our industry. We
need people to get in contact and offer to help us. We are very eager that they do. You've kindly offered to help publicise Pensions Archive Trust. There are a lot of big organisations out there. If they could include some publicity about Pensions Archive Trust, it basically costs them nothing, but they can help us. So contact Pensions Archive Trust.
Well, Malcolm, inspiring people about pensions is a super way to end this. I think hopefully some of our listeners are inspired by this. Let's get word, all of us, out about the Pensions Archive Trust. It's a great charity. It's centred on pensions, and let's all see if we can find just a tiny bit each to help with. Malcolm, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. It's, who on earth would listen to it? I don't know, but we do have some good people out there and some strange people too, and maybe who knows. This might be the first one of our radio shows that goes viral. Malcolm, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. It's been a pleasure, and I'm grateful to you for the opportunity.
You've been listening to JargonFree Radio, brought to you by Little Voice Media, the video and audio specialists.